Will the Dallas Cowboys offensive line hold up against the Giants in week 4? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we are previewing the Cowboys-Giants Thursday night football game. And I don't want to say this is a season-changing type of game for the Cowboys, but Landon, if the Cowboys don't win, I'm probably going to be on PFF's mock draft simulator a lot on Friday. Just letting you know.
Yeah, I mean, and I wouldn't blame you. And certainly you wouldn't be alone in kind of fully jumping off the cliff at that point after losing what should be motivating certainly a simpler win that you would hope than the previous weeks, right? It's all the things that the Cowboys need. Like, it's a must-win situation against a division opponent, a team that you have traditionally beaten pretty consistently since Dak has been around. I think Dak has never lost to the Giants, or has only lost to the Giants once, maybe.
I think he lost twice during his rookie year, and that's it.
Okay, and so I think if all of that flying in the face, with all the motivation in the world coming off of back-to-back losses, if the Cowboys still lose this third game in a row against the New York Giants, a division game that they have to win, I think it certainly is time to start to really panic about the future of this team and their outcome of the season overall. But let's talk about it a little bit, because I do feel like I'm hoping that the narrative instead is going to be the kind of preseason thaw has started to wear away, and we start to see the real kind of Dallas Cowboys that we're used to.
I will say, I think in a lot of ways, this is the type of game the Cowboys need. Now, I'm not saying they're going to win.
Yeah.
But playing a familiar opponent that they've had a history of playing well against, it's a I'm just going to refer to these teams as Shanahan teams and non-Shanahan teams, right?
Yeah.
This is a non-Shanahan team, right? That the Cowboys should do well against. Dak obviously knows the personnel on defense really well.
Mm-hmm.
My concern going into this game, if the Cowboys are going to lose this game, Landon, it's going to be because their offensive line can't hold up. We've seen historically the Cowboys playing against this Giants pass rush have played really well. Now, that's a different offensive line with Tyron Smith and a younger Zach Martin. But you look at this Giants defensive line. I was having a conversation with somebody this morning. You can make a case that this is the best defensive line in the league with Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, Azeez Ojulari. Like, they are loaded on the defensive line. That's my concern for this one.
Yeah. I mean, I would certainly preface that by saying that a lot of that has been hypothetical right now. Like, we've only seen a little bit of Brian Burns, and it hasn't quite been fully unleashed yet. I don't know and I think I agree with you, right? Like, on paper, you look at all those guys, including Dexter Lawrence, who's probably the best defensive lineman in football, or is certainly in the conversation, right? And I think that you look at all of that potential, and I think that it started to show itself a little bit last week against the Browns. Yeah. But I think up until then, it really hadn't kind of, metastasized into something real yet.
Do you know how many pressures
have to avoid?
Do you know how many pressures they had last week against Cleveland, according to PFF?
Was it like 16 or something like that?
36.
36?
36.
Wow. Well, that's, when you're watching that game, that isn't surprising, because it felt like Watson was kind of on the run constantly.
Yeah. So here's the numbers. So PFF gives, instead of half sacks, they give full sacks. So just keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
36 pressures, 10 sacks, 20 hurries, 9 QB hits last week against Cleveland.
Yeah. So, I mean, they got after it. And look, we know that Cleveland line is certainly beat up at this point, especially after us and then the last week as well. So it is certainly something that the Cowboys have to be mindful of, because like I said, as the game went on, they certainly Burns started to work in a little bit more, and you started to see a little bit of the kind of efforts. They also, I have to say, for having normally a very kind of more conservative, I would say, defensive coordinator as far as like blitzing goes, they were blitzing quite a bit in that
They
game.
blitzed a lot. And we have a crossover show tomorrow coming with Patricia Traina, which we recorded earlier. She said this defensive coordinator loves to blitz. Like, he's not going to sit back and just 4-man rush you all game. Now, I do think that probably works well for the Cowboys because Dak is a very good quarterback at going against the blitz, but it's not going to be simple for Dak in this game. Let's say that.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that I think that that defense coordinator likes traditionally to sit back and to rush only 4 and drop into coverage. I think that's kind of part of the issue that the Browns had, was that they were not necessarily, it seems like they were not necessarily expecting the blitz package that the Giants deployed. So I do think the Cowboys should prepare for both, right? Like, because at this point they've shown that was a very successful package of deployments for the defense. So I do think that before I watched that Cleveland game, I would have said, be careful for, they'll drop 7, they'll have 4 that'll come after you. They have a group of 4 guys who they can, legitimately rush the passer with. But after watching the game, they definitely like to send their linebackers. They sent their nickel a couple different times. I think he got a sack, Phillips, I think it was. So yeah, I mean, I think they definitely switched it up last week and sent pressure and got a lot of success, as you mentioned, against the Cleveland Browns doing that. So I wouldn't be shocked at all if they kind of mixed it up this week and tried to attack a Cowboys offensive line with more blitzes.
Now, here's the thing. If the Cowboys can find a way to protect Dak generally well, this should be a good game for the offense, because they just don't have the depth in the secondary. And again, I can remember doing these shows before where we said this team doesn't have a good secondary and the Cowboys really struggle. But going into this matchup, the Giants could be down their top 3 slot corners. Adoree Jackson is likely to be out. Andrew Phillips likely to be out. Their outside cornerbacks are Deontay Banks and our guy Cordell Flott, who
Flott, that's right.
Flott is expected to play probably a lot in the slot this week. Banks had a very rough game against Amari Cooper last week. So assuming you can keep Dak healthy and upright and not pressured, I would think that the receivers would have a big game in this one.
We got to take a timeout real quick, because you just said that apparently we're going to see Flott a lot in the slot. Is that what that is?
How's that?
Oh, man. Well, listen, I hope that we see Flott a lot in the slot when he gets to play Lamb, because I would definitely like to see that matchup with Lamb in the slot while Flott's in the slot a lot.
Nice. This is like a Dr. Seuss
book. Yeah, no, look, I mean, I think that even without the injuries, this Giants defensive secondary is bad. It's not very talented. It's young. Even the safeties back there, I like but didn't love. And they felt like Newbin should be a guy that is working his way into a backup situation, not a starter at safety. They just have a lot of youth and not a ton of like high end talent either. It's not like they have a bunch of first round pick rookies. It's like kind of down roster guys. They do have Banks on one side, right? But he has been, I think that's right, isn't it? He has been a punching Judy, to say the least, at different points in the past game. So, I think that it's a situation where, yes, the Cowboys need to find a way to block it up. And I have a feeling that part of the reason that you started to see the defensive coordinator start to send a lot more pressure is because of the ineptitude of the guys in the back end, just because they have to limit the window, the amount of time that those guys are covering. So Dak is traditionally a very, very good quarterback against the blitz. That hasn't necessarily been the case this year.
No.
But I mean, I think that's not, I don't think that who Dak has changed. I think this is just part of the kind of getting in sync with the rest of the offense, especially in blitz situations. You just have to sometimes go by sight, and it just takes reps of getting used to that. So I imagine that Dak will definitely be more on his P's and Q's if they blitz this week. And again, the lack of help on the back end could really create a situation the Giants, where blitzing might be a real double-edged sword for them because CD and Dak may be able to really, really burn them if they don't get home.
All right, let's talk about the Giants offense against the Cowboys defense. Can they finally hold a team under, I don't know what, 28 points this week? We'll discuss that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you're watching a game and you get a hunch that, hey, maybe this team is a little undervalued, or yeah, this team is definitely going to win, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You can go bet on this Cowboys-Giants game over on FanDuel. When I checked the line on early Wednesday morning, the Cowboys were 4.5-point favorites. That's actually been bet up to 5.5. We'll see where that ends up finishing, but it's clear that bettors are liking the Cowboys going into Thursday Night Football. You can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. You don't even have to win or lose. All you have to do is place a bet, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That is FanDuel.com, America's top sportsbook. Again, FanDuel.com. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We are previewing this Cowboys-Giants Thursday Night Football game. Basically a must-win game for the Cowboys, with games coming up against the Steelers in Pittsburgh, Detroit, San Francisco, Philadelphia, Houston, all right in a row. Like, you got to get this one. For the Cowboys to get this win, Landon, they're going to have to be much better on defense. How do you think this version of the Cowboys defense matches up against Brian Daboll's offense?
Well, I mean, again, I think until we stop it, I think we're going to be facing another game plan where they're going to limit the exposure of the passing attack against our defense, right? So they are going to do whatever they can to try to master a run game that can get chunk plays and that can keep the offense from having to pass the ball in obvious passing situations. I think the difference this week than previous weeks is the talent level on offense. Now, I actually want to take a second to compliment the Giants, because I do think that they have, for the first time in quite a while, assembled an actual offense this year.
Yes.
Like, I look, the offensive line is what it is. We'll talk about that, and I think there's lots of opportunities for the Cowboys to take advantage there. But the fact that they've added all these other offensive element pieces, it just diversifies the offense, and it's going to make things like running the ball easier for them, because it's now not the only option for the Giants, right? Now that you've got a guy like Neighbors, you've seen a guy like Robinson kind of come into his own as kind of a yak receiver. You've got a little bit of a juice back who can catch the ball out of the backfield in Tracy. I think all of these things in combined are going to help the Giants actually run the ball, because now you're not just focusing on the Giants running the ball. You add in the fact that Daniel Jones is a good runner of the football. They still have some zone read stuff in their playbook, so the Cowboys have got to figure that out this week.
Yep.
There is a way that the Giants could cobble together an offense out of a Dable system that could really, really, really give this Cowboys defense a lot of trouble. And until they find a way to, win in the run game enough to put these teams in passing situations, and those situations, the Cowboys are extremely overmatching the Giants. I understand that the wide receiver talent, but the problem is that, especially on that right side of the offensive line, they are not going to be able to block Micah Parsons and Lawrence and all the guys the Cowboys have.
And I even want to mention, so Greg Van Roten and Jermaine Illuminor were the starting offensive linemen for the Raiders last year when I happened to cover that team. One of the reasons why
that's crazy.
Yeah, they signed both of those guys this offseason. One of the reasons why the Raiders moved on from those guys is they're actually pretty good in pass protection, but they just don't open up holes in the run game. And that's not all that uncommon for older offensive linemen. Like, I think you saw that last year with Tyron Smith, right, with the Cowboys, right?
Yeah.
Still a really good pass blocker, but doesn't have the drive to move guys off the line of scrimmage. If those two are opening up holes in the run game, the Cowboys are going to have a major problem.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
absolutely.
That's the issue. The other thing I wanted to point out is Darius Slayton, Wan'Dale Robinson, Jalen Hyatt, and Malik Neighbors. And I'm going to have to double check this. I'm pretty sure those four receivers are like in the bottom 15 in run blocking grade. And Theo Johnson is an athletic tight end who
Yeah, he's
plays the
not.
most snaps but doesn't block,
Mhm.
right? So they're not really getting a lot of blocking on their edges. That could end up being the difference between the Cowboys stopping the run and not stopping the run this week.
Yeah, I mean, I would look for, and it's like, again, we should also mention, they have Singletary as their back, right? And he's a very smart and savvy back, right? So I think it's going to be a lot of more wide open run sets, right?
Yes.
Like I
Yes.
wouldn't, I think that they think they're going to run the ball, but the way that they run the ball is out of 11 personnel, right? And
They're
or a
not going to
shotgun
go
run.
heavy and try to overpower you because they just
They don't have
can't
the
that way.
personnel for it.
No.
Yeah, they just yeah, they don't have the personnel for it. So it's going to be think about actually similar to what we saw, like, well, no, it's not. It's going to be a shotgun based run system.
Yes.
Like, you will see Daniel Jones under center, but not very often. And I think that they'll do some zone read stuff. I'm sure they'll pull some things from the Baltimore game because that a lot of that stuff was successful. Look for, again, a return of that split zone read stuff where that leaves the quarterback a blocker on his side to kind of
And,
help the box count on that.
and
So
Daniel Jones is a really good athlete. So, and we've seen
yeah.
him before. Like he can have these 60, 70-yard rushing games. So I fully expect Brian Dable to lean on Daniel Jones's legs to help him out in this one.
Now, again, Daniel Jones is not Lamar Jackson.
No, he's not.
Singletary is not Derrick Henry. Like, these guys, and the Baltimore offensive line, has his issues. But I mean, honestly, I think it's probably, equal, if not better, than what the Giants have. The Giants on the left side, still have Andrew Thomas. He's still going to be a difficult matchup in both the run and the pass game. I think that Schmidt is a fine center.
He's fine.
He's better, probably better than league average. Runyon is a guy that is getting older, is a little long in the tooth. So I think all these guys are probably league average or better, or hovering around there. The Cowboys have got to find a way to, especially in the run game, because that's where the right side is very, very less than league average. They've got to find a way to win on the rundowns enough to put them in positive situations. If they can get them in passing situations, I think the Giants could be in trouble. Right. Like, I think that like they definitely have receivers. You got to watch out for Neighbors. They're going to give Neighbors touches all different ways, like handoffs, jet sweeps. He took a wildcat snap.
Yeah. Neighbors is going to have at least two awesome plays where maybe you have great coverage, or maybe he just makes an awesome play after the catch and you're going to have to live with it. What you don't want is Wan'Dale Robinson to be a big factor in this one. Darius Slayton making a play down the field. Jalen Hyatt burning you on a 75-yard touchdown. Like, it can't be the others in this one.
Yeah, it's Slayton and Hyatt deep. It's Robinson in the intermediate area that you got to watch. Short intermediate stuff becoming long stuff because he breaks tackles, and the Neighbors all over the place, right? But the way that you stop all of that is that you get them into situations where they have to pass the ball. And if they have to pass the ball, then they have to block Micah Parsons, and they can't do that. So that's how the Cowboys win.
Historically, what we've seen is if you hit Daniel Jones early in these games, his eyes start to drop, right?
Yep.
And I don't think it's gotten better as his career has gone on. In fact, I think it's actually probably gotten a little bit worse. But that's the game script. And this is what we've been talking about the Cowboys. They are so dependent on a certain game script to win these games. They get behind, they have a really hard time coming back because the run defense is so poor. But if they can get ahead of these games and you can kind of limit your exposure on the ground, that's when I think they can start to tee off on quarterbacks, and we can start to see some of the exotic blitzes. We remember coming out of week one, Trayvon Diggs said that you only seen like 2 or 3 of these crazy packages from Zimmer. We haven't got to see them at all over the last 2 weeks because they just haven't been in a position to use them. I'm hoping this is the week where we get to see some of the exotic defenses come back.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, we used to talk all the time about paths to victory, right? Like how different ways the teams can win these football games. Unfortunately, it seems like as the season has unfolded, that the Cowboys have very few paths to victories in these games. They need to find a way to expand it a little bit, but as it stands right now, they kind of need the game to play out a certain way for them to take advantage. So the Cowboys would kind of have to force their hand a little bit.
All right, Lana, let's make predictions for this game. Big NFC East game to avoid being in last place, which is hard to believe.
God.
Who will win on Thursday Night Football? We'll break it down next. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. What's something that you would love to learn? As an adult, do you make time to learn new things as often as you would like, or was that lost in your childhood? Kids are always learning and growing, but as adults, sometimes we lose that curiosity. What's something that you would like to learn? Maybe you'd like to learn how to go golfing or bowling, or maybe it's a new language, or maybe it's something as simple as gardening. Therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder because your back to school era can come at any age. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's done entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for any reason at no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockdown today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/locked on. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, go listen to the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. First, the madman Tyler Rowland kicks you off in the morning with a double shot of NFL espresso. Then stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Both those guys are in a little bit rough shape,
Man.
covering the Titans and Jags. So that's got to be a lot of fun. Find Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Lane, let's do our predictions here for Week 4, Cowboys at Giants. Who do you got?
I'm gonna pick the Cowboys because I keep going back to we are so bad. We as a general fan base are so bad about getting ourselves in the right mental place before the season and preparing ourselves, and then just forgetting all of what we talked about after the preseason once the regular season starts. Whether that's, I'm never going to watch a Cowboys game again, and then eventually watching the first game, or, just being like, oh, I'm not going to freak out when the early part of the season doesn't look right because no one's playing in the preseason anymore and the NFL's kind of changed. And then here we are, Week 3, all full of sweat panic, flop sweating over the fact that the Cowboys are 1-2, and then they have to play a Thursday night game against the Giants. I think I said it earlier. I think that as the season goes on, this next week, the following week, you're going to start to see more of the thaw of the preseason go away, right? It's going to start to melt away. I think the NFL will start shaping into, and I think this is league wide, not just the Cowboys. I think that the league will start shaping back into a little bit closer to what we kind of anticipated, right? The good teams will start playing good again. And some of the bad teams will remain up top, but I think, this as a surprise, but others will kind of fall back to earth as everything starts to even out as these next few weeks go on. I expect the same thing for the Cowboys. I expect that, we saw a little bit of the old Cowboys in that 2-minute offense at the end of the game last week. I'm hoping that this loss and everything that's been said in the last 2 weeks has just kind of kicked their butts a little bit, and that they'll kind of get back into better shape. I understand that there are things about this team that are not like, sequencing or coordination. Like there's personnel issues that aren't going to be solved. But the aspects that we expected the Cowboys to be good at, I still have yet to see them be consistently good at. And I think that that's because of just a general preseason malaise. So all of that is a very long-winded way of saying I think the Cowboys kind of get their groove back on the road against the Giants, a team that they're familiar with beating up. And if they don't, then we should start, really having a discussion of whether they will.
Yeah.
I'm going to pick the Cowboys to win 28-21.
So last year, the Cowboys in the 2 games against the Giants, the combined score was 89-17. I don't think it's going to be that easy this time around. Needless to say, like I know that's not a super hot take, but that's my take. I do predict that the Cowboys will win this game, but I don't think it's going to be easy. I kind of anticipate that we're going to go in like to the third quarter, and this is going to be a 13-13 type of game, or 14. Yeah. Maybe Dallas will be down 17-13. But I do think that their overall talent should win out. I just don't think that they don't have the offense that the Ravens have that can make it so hard to defend. And they don't have the defense like the Saints do, where not only do they have a good pass rush, but they've got the defenders on the back end that can really fly around. I do think this is a good matchup for the Cowboys, but because it's a Thursday game and these Thursday games tend to be a little bit wonky, I do think it's going to be close. I would pick the Giants to cover the spread. I bet it ends up at 6. I think it's going to be a 3-point game. I'll say Dallas 24-23.
Yeah, even though I picked a 7-point win for the Cowboys, I do think you're right. I think this is going to be a close game. I think about that. Was it the Thanksgiving game 2 years ago?
Yes, where
Where
it was
like,
it was close midway through the third quarter.
yep, and it just felt like the Cowboys, like, were the better team, but they couldn't get out of their own way. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what I feel like could possibly happen, where it's still just early on, the Cowboys like, "Eh, no, 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 no,
Yeah.
no, no, no,
Yeah.
no." They can't get the
Yeah.
engine started, and then finally it turns over, and then it starts to look a little bit more familiar at that point. But yeah, I anticipate, even with my score prediction being 7 points, I predict a close game for most of this.
I do want to say, I think there's a couple scenarios where we could see a blowout. The first would be
Sure.
the offense just starts off well. You go touchdown,
Mhm.
field goal, you're up 10-0, and that game script, that positive game script turns to the Cowboys, right? Like,
Yep.
and now you're playing with the lead. Unfortunately, I can also see another scenario where I really question the mental toughness of this team.
Mm,
And if things go poorly early on, and it's like, okay, Dak fumbles on a strip sack, they get an early touchdown, the offense starts slow, and all of a sudden it's 10-0 the other way. If things don't feel like an avalanche, where there's no way that this
no,
game should be a blowout, but it just feels like, oh, here we go again for the
can't keep
third
going.
straight time, right? I haven't been worried about that in the past under Mike McCarthy and Dan Quinn teams. I am feeling a little bit that way now with this roster.
This is a young team, man.
It's a
Like,
young
and
team.
and
Yeah.
and and so, like, that kind of thing could definitely happen. I could also see a situation where, the game, it looks great and the game script goes the way we want. The Cowboys get ahead, but they cannot close the game because they can't run the football consistently, right?
Yeah.
So suddenly, the Giants kind of hang around, and then maybe this game gets close at the end when it shouldn't have ever been close at the end. So yeah, I mean, there's certainly there are certainly lots of ways that the Cowboys could disappoint us this Sunday,
Well,
but I
this is
also think that there's tons of ways that they can win this game very closely.
this is kind of the problem, and this is going to sound really weird. Over the last, I guess, 2 years now, they really haven't won very many close games. Like you can count for them winning 12 games in each of the last 3 seasons. Like you can count on your one hand how many like fourth quarter wins they have. Those are the type of wins that kind of get you to believe, hey, we're going to, as long as we keep this thing close, we're going to figure out a way to pull it off. I just don't know if they have any of that grit to them yet. And you have to earn it. You have to win games that
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
Until they do it, I kind of can't trust them that they will.
I'll tell you what, it's interesting to contrast that aspect of the football team with the Garrett Cowboys, right? Because the
Oh,
Garrett
yes,
Cowboys
yes.
only ever played in close games, and they were actually pretty decent at it. In fact, historically good at winning close games at points. But the problem is that that's not a way to like consistently try to win football games.
No,
If you
because
want to win a lot of games,
you end up losing games that you shouldn't lose against inferior opponents because you're playing a certain style that way.
but the other adverse of that is with the Cowboys the last 3 years, yes, they've won a ton of games, but when they needed games that were
Correct.
close, they didn't have the kind of institutional toughness that, have playing in 14 to 15 close games over the last 2 years
Yes.
would have had, like it did with the Garrett Cowboys. So yeah, I think you're right. I think this is and again, young team. So they don't have very much, history in dealing with close games, period. In fact, they haven't played in any close game. I
No.
mean, really, if you want to call the Ravens game a close game, it really wasn't. But the Cowboys, the iteration, have yet to play in a close game.
I'm trying to think. I think last year the only close game. Oh, they played in two. They beat the Lions in a game where, frankly, they probably shouldn't have won that game based off of how that went. And then the Seattle game, right? Like those were the only games that they won close, I believe, last year. The Charger game was close at the end, but they have not played in very many of those over the last couple of years.
No, and again, like that's a good thing in a lot of ways, but
It is.
when you need it, it's not great because you want that experience. And maybe that's been part of the issue when they get into the playoffs, right? Is that they just haven't been faced with a ton of adversity at times, and
that's why, in some ways, Landon, like if I could strip the outcome of this game, the best outcome for me would be like this is a close game, and maybe the Cowboys are down by 7 going into the fourth quarter, and they find a way to battle back and win a close game. I almost think that would be better for the long-term health of this team than winning a game 40-0 like they did in week 1 last year.
Yeah, and that's the big thing about this game is that, it's how they win is going to be important, but
If they win,
if they win, like
yes,
it's a big if they win or if they lose, it's going to be multiplied by the fact that they have to win this game. So if they
yeah,
lose, it is going to be incredibly demoralizing to spend the next 10 days because we're going to have a long break thinking about a three game loss. If they win, suddenly you get a little bit of breathing room to kind of take these 10 days, reevaluate things, and hopefully
yeah.
set the ship right for the rest of the season.
Big game. All right, that's it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every day. Check out the channel on YouTube. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier. Tomorrow's show early on Thursday morning will be the crossover. And then Landon and I are back Thursday night to break it all down. We'll see you then.